The morning briefing at Edwards Air Force Base was proceeding exactly as it had for the past 3 years, with Captain Elena Vasquez sitting in the back row, overlooked and underestimated by every pilot in the room. What none of them knew was that in less than 48 hours, she would shatter a flight record that had stood untouchable for over 2 decades, and the same colleagues who dismissed her as just another diversity hire would be forced to confront the fact that they had been sharing their squadron with one of the most naturally gifted aviators in military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 0430 hours. But Captain Elena Vasquez had already been awake for 20 minutes. Lying motionless in her narrow dormitory bed while mentally rehearsing the day's flight scenarios. At 28, she had developed the habit of arriving everywhere early and staying late, though her extra efforts seemed to go unnoticed by the flight instructors and fellow pilots at Edwards Air Force Base. Elena's compact frame moved efficiently. Through her morning routine, shower, uniform pressed to perfection, boots polished to mirror shine. Every detail of her appearance was meticulously maintained, a necessity when you were constantly under scrutiny for reasons that had nothing to do with your flying ability. The mirror reflected back dark eyes that held more determination than most people twice her age, framed by regulation-length black hair pulled into a flawless bun. The walk to the flight line took her past the memorial wall honoring test pilots who had pushed the boundaries of aviation, many paying the ultimate price for advancing human flight. Elena paused briefly at the plaque commemorating Colonel Patricia Hayes, no relation to the military officer from our previous story, but rather a pioneering aviator who had broken gender barriers in the 1990s. The inscription read, "She flew not for glory, but to prove what was possible." The sentiment resonated deeply with Elena, who had spent her entire military career fighting battles that had nothing to do with enemy aircraft. Her path to Edwards had been unconventional, a scholarship kid from East Los Angeles who had earned her pilot's wings through sheer determination and countless hours of study, while her classmates at the Air Force Academy relied on family connections and inherited privilege. Squadron leader Major James Thompson was already holding court near the flight roster when Elena arrived at the briefing room. At 42, Thompson possessed the kind of easy confidence that came from never having his capabilities questioned based on his appearance. His flight suit bore patches from multiple deployments and advanced training programs, and he commanded respect through a combination of genuine skill and institutional support that Elena could only dream of receiving. "Vasquez," Thompson called out as she entered, his tone carrying the particular brand of condescension she had learned to recognize. "You're on maintenance inspection duty again today. Lieutenant Morrison here needs someone to check his aircraft systems before his advanced maneuvers training." Lieutenant David Morrison, fresh from flight school and possessed of the kind of swagger that only came from never facing a real challenge, grinned at the assignment. Morrison's father was a retired Air Force general. His brother flew F-22 Raptors in combat squadrons, and his acceptance into the test pilot program had been fast-tracked in ways that Elena's application never could be. "Nothing personal, Vasquez," Morrison said with false magnanimity, "but I need someone detail-oriented for the technical stuff. You know how it is." Elena knew exactly how it was. Despite logging more flight hours than Morrison and scoring higher on every technical examination, she was consistently assigned to support roles while male pilots with inferior records received opportunities for advancement. Her personnel file contained glowing reviews from the few instructors willing to look beyond preconceptions, but those voices were consistently outvoted by colleagues who viewed her presence as a political statement rather than a professional asset. "Of course, sir," Elena replied with practiced neutrality, accepting the clipboard containing Morrison's pre-flight inspection requirements. She had learned early in her career that arguing against such assignments only provided ammunition for those who claimed she couldn't handle authority or constructive criticism. The hangar buzzed with activity as various flight crews prepared for the day's missions. Elena moved through Morrison's aircraft inspection with methodical precision, checking hydraulic fluid levels, control surface responses, and engine parameters with the kind of thoroughness that came from understanding that mechanical failures could be fatal. Her attention to detail had prevented 3 potential accidents over the past year, though the incidents were attributed to routine maintenance procedures rather than her specific expertise. "Taking your time as usual, Vasquez," called out Captain Brian Foster, Morrison's best friend and fellow beneficiary of family military connections. Foster's comment drew snickers from several nearby pilots, who had gathered to watch the morning's advanced training assignments being distributed. "Just being thorough, sir," Elena responded without looking up from her checklist. She had discovered that engaging with Foster's provocations only escalated situations that were already professionally uncomfortable. The truth was that Elena's thoroughness stemmed from a deep understanding of aircraft systems that surpassed most of her colleagues. During off-duty hours, she studied technical manuals that others considered optional reading, familiarizing herself with every component and potential failure point of the various aircraft in their squadron. Her knowledge base had impressed the civilian contractors who performed major maintenance, but military tradition valued pilot confidence over technical expertise. As the morning briefing commenced, Elena took her customary position in the back row while senior pilots occupied the front seats. Major Thompson outlined the day's training objectives, focusing primarily on high-altitude performance testing. That would be conducted by Morrison, Foster, and 2 other male pilots whose qualifications were less impressive than Elena's but whose prospects for advancement remained significantly brighter. "The F-16D will be pushed to maximum service ceiling today," Thompson explained, referencing the aircraft that Elena had been hoping to fly for the past 8 months. "We need pilots who can handle extreme altitude without losing focus or making critical errors under pressure." Elena bit back the observation that she had never made a critical error in any aircraft. Unlike Morrison, who had been forced to abort 2 training missions due to procedural mistakes that could have resulted in equipment damage, such comments would be viewed as insubordination rather than legitimate professional concerns. Dr. Carolyn Walsh, the civilian flight surgeon responsible for pilot medical evaluations, entered the briefing room carrying a stack of files. Walsh was one of the few people at Edwards who seemed to evaluate personnel based purely on performance metrics rather than underlying assumptions about capability. Her medical assessments had consistently rated Elena as one of the squadron's most physically and mentally prepared pilots. "I need to discuss altitude tolerance test results," Dr. Walsh announced, consulting her notes. "We have 3 pilots cleared for extreme altitude operations based on their latest physiological assessments." Elena felt a familiar flutter of hope, knowing that her test scores had been exceptional. The altitude chamber evaluations measured how pilots responded to reduced oxygen levels, extreme cold, and the disorientation that accompanied high-altitude flight. Her results had exceeded those of every pilot in the squadron, including several who were already flying missions she was deemed not ready for. "Morrison, Foster, and Jenkins are cleared for today's high-altitude testing," Dr. Walsh announced, reading from her list without looking up. The disappointment hit Elena like a physical blow, though she maintained her neutral expression through years of practice. Her test scores had been higher than all 3 selected pilots, but apparently other factors took precedence over objective medical evaluation results. After the briefing, Elena approached Dr. Walsh privately, hoping to understand the decision-making process that had excluded her from high-altitude operations, despite superior test results. "I don't make the flight assignments," Dr. Walsh said quietly, her expression sympathetic but cautious. "I only provide medical clearances. Your scores were outstanding, but operational decisions are made by flight leadership based on factors beyond my scope." The euphemistic language was carefully chosen, but Elena understood the underlying message. Her medical qualifications were irrelevant when measured against institutional preferences that had nothing to do with flying ability. The remainder of the morning was spent in routine maintenance duties while Morrison, Foster, and Jenkins prepared for the kind of challenging flight operations that Elena had been training for throughout her career. She watched through the hangar windows as they walked toward their aircraft with the casual confidence of people who had never doubted their right to be there. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her younger sister, Isabella, who was finishing her engineering degree at UCLA. "How's the flying going? Still working toward that test pilot certification?" The question was innocent, but it highlighted the gap between Elena's aspirations and her current reality. Test pilot certification required advanced flight experience, but she was systematically denied, creating a professional catch-22 that seemed designed to limit her career progression. Instead of responding immediately, Elena focused on completing Morrison's pre-flight inspection with the same meticulous attention that characterized all her work. Every bolt was checked, every system verified, every potential issue identified and documented. Her thoroughness had earned grudging respect from the maintenance crews, who appreciated working with someone who understood their challenges. As Morrison returned from his mission briefing, Elena presented him with the completed inspection report and aircraft clearance. His casual thanks barely acknowledged the professional expertise that had ensured his safety during the upcoming flight. "Don't wait up," Morrison joked to the assembled pilots. "This altitude testing might take a while. You know how it is when you're pushing the envelope." Elena knew exactly how altitude testing worked, having studied every manual and procedure associated with high-altitude operations. She also knew that Morrison's understanding of the physiological challenges was superficial compared to her own preparation, but pointing out such discrepancies would only reinforce perceptions about her attitude and team compatibility. The afternoon stretched ahead with more routine assignments while her colleagues engaged in the kind of advanced flying that Elena had spent years preparing for. But unknown to everyone around her, including Elena herself, forces were already in motion that would soon provide her with an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that would redefine everyone's understanding of what she was truly capable of achieving. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The emergency klaxon pierced the afternoon calm at Edwards Air Force Base at precisely 1,347 hours, sending pilots and ground crews scrambling toward the Flight Operations Center. Elena was calibrating navigation equipment in Hangar 7 when the urgent announcement crackled over the base-wide communication system. "All available pilots report to operations immediately. We have a code red search and rescue situation developing." Elena dropped her tools and ran toward the operations building alongside pilots from various squadrons, her pulse quickening with the possibility that she might finally be called upon for something more significant than routine maintenance duties. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as flight controllers coordinated with civilian authorities and military rescue units across 3 states. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander, stood at the central briefing podium with an expression of grim determination. Williams was a respected leader who had earned her position through decades of exceptional service, though even she operated within institutional constraints that limited certain opportunities for female aviators. "Gentlemen and Captain Vasquez," Williams began, the awkward addition highlighting Elena's singular status among the assembled pilots. "We have a civilian aircraft down in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, and we have a narrow window for successful rescue operations. The situation briefing revealed a private aircraft carrying a family of 4 that had disappeared from radar during a cross-country flight. The last known position placed them somewhere in the rugged mountain terrain east of the base, an area notorious for unpredictable weather patterns and treacherous flying conditions that had claimed numerous aircraft over the decades. Wind speeds are gusting to 60 knots with severe turbulence reported at all altitudes, continued Major Harrison Clark, the operations officer coordinating the rescue mission. Visibility is near zero in several sectors, and we're looking at a storm system that will make flying impossible within the next 4 hours. Elena listened intently as Clark outlined the search parameters and flight requirements. The mission demanded exceptional flying skills, intimate knowledge of mountain weather patterns, and the ability to navigate by instruments alone through some of the most challenging terrain in North America. These were exactly the conditions she had been studying and preparing for throughout her career. Morrison, Foster, Jenkins, and Peterson will comprise our primary search teams, Clark announced, naming the same pilots who had been selected for morning's altitude testing. Each team will cover designated grid sectors using standard search protocols. Elena raised her hand, hoping to volunteer for a secondary search role or support position that might allow her to contribute meaningfully to the rescue effort. Clark acknowledged her gesture with a barely perceptible nod. Vasquez, you'll coordinate ground communications and monitor weather updates from operations. We need someone reliable handling radio traffic while the real pilots are in the air. The assignment was both insulting and predictable. Despite her superior weather analysis skills and mountain flying experience gained during training flights in Colorado, Elena was once again relegated to a support role while less qualified pilots handled the actual flying. Her knowledge of Sierra Nevada terrain patterns, accumulated through years of studying topographical maps and weather data, was apparently less valuable than gender-based assumptions about capability. As the selected pilots prepared for departure, Elena noticed several concerning elements in their mission planning that weren't being addressed. The weather briefing had understated the severity of downdrafts common in the search area, and the fuel calculation seemed optimistic given the extended flight times required for thorough grid searches. "Excuse me, Major Clark," Elena interjected. "Carefully, I've studied the weather patterns in Sectors 7 and 9 extensively. The terrain creates some unusual wind conditions that might not be reflected in the standard meteorological reports." Clark's expression suggested he viewed her input as an unwelcome distraction from more important preparations. "I'm sure our pilots can handle standard mountain flying conditions, Captain. Focus on your communication duties." The dismissal was swift and definitive, though Elena knew her concerns were legitimate. She had spent countless off-duty hours analyzing accident reports from the Sierra Nevada region, identifying patterns that could help prevent crashes and improve search effectiveness. Her insights were based on rigorous study rather than casual observation, but institutional hierarchy prevented such knowledge from being considered seriously. The search aircraft departed in sequence, their engines disappearing into overcast skies that seemed to grow more ominous by the hour. Elena settled into the communication station, monitoring multiple radio frequencies while tracking each aircraft's position and fuel status. The work required intense concentration and split-second decision-making, though it was viewed as clerical rather than operational. Within 30 minutes, the first problems emerged. Morrison's team reported severe turbulence that had forced them to reduce altitude, limiting their search effectiveness and increasing fuel consumption. Foster's aircraft encountered unexpected wind shear that required immediate course corrections to avoid controlled flight into terrain. "Base operations, this is Search Team 3, Jenkins' voice crackled over the radio with obvious strain. "We're experiencing equipment malfunctions in this weather. Navigation systems are intermittent, and we're having difficulty maintaining grid patterns. Elena monitored the developing crisis with growing concern. The weather conditions were evolving exactly as she had predicted, but the search pilots were encountering difficulties they hadn't anticipated. Their flight planning had been based on standard procedures rather than the specific challenges presented by Sierra Nevada weather patterns. Search Team 1 to operations. Morrison's transmission carried a note of uncertainty that was unusual for his typically confident communications. Visibility has dropped to near zero. We're unable to maintain visual search protocols and are switching to instrument flying only. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but Elena was restricted to relaying information rather than providing the tactical advice that might improve mission effectiveness. She watched the aircraft positions on her radar screen, noting flight paths that were inefficient for the current conditions and fuel consumption rates that threatened to force early returns before the search area had been adequately covered. Docked. Caroline Walsh entered the operations center carrying updated weather reports that confirmed Elena's earlier concerns. The storm system was intensifying faster than predicted, and the window for safe flying operations was closing more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. We need to consider recalling the search teams, Dr. Walsh advised Colonel Williams quietly. These weather conditions are approaching the limits of safe flight operations. Elena overheard the conversation and realized that the rescue mission was about to be aborted, just as the civilian aircraft's occupants were running out of time. The combination of weather conditions, equipment problems, and inefficient search patterns was creating a situation where lives would be lost not due to impossible circumstances, but due to suboptimal mission execution. Colonel Williams, Elena said, stepping away from her communication station with a decision that could end her career. I request permission to launch an additional search aircraft. I believe I can navigate these conditions more effectively than our current teams. The operations center fell silent. Every person present understood that Elena was essentially volunteering for a mission that multiple male pilots were struggling to complete safely. Her request challenged fundamental assumptions about capability and risk assessment that were deeply embedded in military aviation culture. Captain Vasquez, Colonel Williams replied carefully, you don't have authorization for independent search operations. Your role is communication support. With respect, ma'am, I have more mountain flying experience than any pilot currently airborne, and my weather analysis indicates there are search techniques specifically suited to these conditions that aren't being employed. Major Clark stepped forward with obvious irritation. Captain, this is not the time for grandstanding. We have experienced pilots handling this situation, and they don't need guidance from someone who's never flown a real mission. The accusation stung because it perfectly illustrated the catch-22 Elena faced. She was denied mission experience and then criticized for lacking mission experience. Her extensive training and superior technical knowledge were dismissed because they hadn't been validated through opportunities she was systematically prevented from receiving. I'm not grandstanding, sir. I'm offering to help save lives using skills that I've spent years developing. The tension in the operations center was palpable as Elena's request hung in the air. Outside, the weather continued to deteriorate, while 4 people remained missing in the mountains, their survival dependent on a rescue operation that was failing. Due to inadequate preparation and institutional assumptions about who was qualified to fly in dangerous conditions, Colonel Williams faced a decision that would either vindicate Elena's years of preparation or potentially end her military career. The choice reflected broader questions about competence, opportunity, and whether the military was truly committed to utilizing all available talent, regardless of preconceptions about gender and capability. Unknown to everyone in that room, Elena's next flight would not only save lives but would demonstrate flying abilities so extraordinary that they would force a complete reevaluation of everything her colleagues thought they knew about aviation excellence. The radio crackled with increasing Desperation as Search Team 2 reported their second equipment failure in 20 minutes. Foster's voice, normally steady with practiced confidence, now carried an edge of concern that was impossible to miss. Operations, we've lost primary navigation. GPS is sporadic, and the storm interference is making instrument readings unreliable. We're burning fuel faster than calculated and may need to return to base within 30 minutes. Colonel Williams studied the weather radar display with growing alarm. The storm system had intensified beyond all predictions, creating flying conditions that were pushing even experienced pilots to their limits. The search grid remained largely uncovered, and the civilian aircraft's emergency locator beacon had been silent for over 2 hours. "Ma'am," Elena pressed, "every minute we delay reduces the chances of finding those people alive. I know I can navigate these conditions." Major Clark stepped between Elena and the colonel, his expression reflecting years of institutional thinking about appropriate roles and capabilities. "Captain Vasquez, I admire your enthusiasm, but this situation requires seasoned combat pilots, not someone whose experience consists primarily of routine training flights." The characterization was both unfair and inaccurate. Elena's flight record included extensive mountain training, adverse weather operations, and emergency procedures practice that exceeded the requirements for most combat assignments. Her routine training flights had been conducted in conditions that would challenge many pilots considered more experienced. Dr. Walsh approached the group with a meteorological report that painted an increasingly grim picture. Wind conditions are now exceeding the operational limits for standard search protocols. We're looking at sustained turbulence that could cause structural damage to aircraft not specifically designed for extreme weather operations. Elena seized the opening that Dr. Walsh's report provided. "The F-16D that I've been maintaining has modifications specifically for high-altitude, adverse weather operations. Its systems are designed to handle exactly these conditions." She was referring to the aircraft that Morrison had been scheduled to fly for altitude testing, the same aircraft whose systems she had inspected with meticulous detail that morning. Her familiarity with its capabilities extended far beyond basic maintenance. She had studied every modification, every enhancement, every performance characteristic that made it uniquely suited for challenging flying conditions. "You know that aircraft better than anyone," Dr. Walsh observed, her medical training making her more objective about capability assessments than her military colleagues. "Your maintenance reports show intimate knowledge of its systems and limitations." Colonel Williams found herself facing a decision that would either save lives or potentially end careers. The conventional choice was to recall the search teams and wait for weather conditions to improve, accepting that the delay would likely prove fatal for the missing civilians. The unconventional choice was to trust Elena's expertise despite institutional preferences that had kept her grounded. "Search Team 3 to operations." Jenkins' voice interrupted the discussion with obvious strain. "We've encountered severe downdrafts that nearly resulted in controlled flight into terrain. Recommend immediate termination of search operations until weather improves." The recommendation effectively meant abandoning the rescue mission. In the time required for weather conditions to improve, the missing family would almost certainly perish from exposure or injuries sustained in the crash. Elena watched the radar displays showing her colleagues struggling with conditions she had been preparing to handle for years. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am," Elena asked Colonel Williams, knowing that her next words would either open doors or end her military career. Williams nodded, recognizing that desperate situations sometimes required unconventional solutions. "The search teams are encountering difficulties because they're using standard procedures for non-standard conditions. The terrain creates wind patterns that require specific approach techniques that aren't covered in normal training. I've studied these patterns extensively and believe I can navigate them safely." Major Clark's expression reflected his growing frustration with Elena's persistence. "Captain, Confidence isn't the same as capability. These are life or death situations that require proven experience, not theoretical knowledge. Then let me prove my experience, Elena replied with quiet determination. Give me one aircraft and 30 minutes. If I can't demonstrate effective search techniques in these conditions, I'll accept whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate. The challenge was unprecedented in Elena's experience at Edwards. Female pilots simply didn't volunteer for missions that male pilots had deemed too dangerous, and they certainly didn't claim superior capability in conditions that had defeated more senior aviators. Her request violated unspoken protocols about hierarchy, gender roles, and institutional expectations. Dr. Walsh consulted her medical files and spoke with the authority of someone whose recommendations could override operational concerns. Captain Vasquez's physiological assessments indicate superior tolerance for the kind of stress these conditions create. Her G-force tolerance, spatial orientation scores, and reaction times under pressure all exceed squadron averages. The medical evidence was objective and irrefutable, though it conflicted with subjective assessments that had kept Elena from advanced flying opportunities. Colonel Williams realized she was confronting the difference between measurable capability and institutional assumptions about capability. Search Team 1 requesting immediate return to base. Morrison's transmission carried unmistakable urgency. We've encountered wind shear that exceeded aircraft limitations. Continuing the search would be unsafe for personnel and equipment. Elena watched the radar screen as Morrison's aircraft turned toward Edwards, effectively reducing the search capability by 25%. Foster and Jenkins were struggling with similar conditions, and Peterson's team had already reported navigation problems that forced them to abandon their assigned search grid. Colonel, Elena said with the kind of calm authority that came from years of preparation for this moment, I can find those people, but only if you let me try. The operations center had grown quiet except for radio chatter from the struggling search teams and the constant hum of weather radar equipment. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a pivotal moment that would either validate years of discrimination or expose it as fundamentally misguided. Colonel Williams looked at Elena for a long moment, weighing institutional pressures against operational necessity. Captain Vasquez, if I authorize this flight and something goes wrong, both our careers are over. You understand that? Yes, ma'am. But if we don't try, 4 people are going to die, and we'll have to live with knowing we had options we didn't pursue. The moral weight of Elena's argument was undeniable. Williams had built her career on making difficult decisions under pressure, and the current situation demanded leadership that prioritized mission success over institutional comfort zones. Major Clark, prepare the F-16D for immediate departure. Captain Vasquez will conduct an independent search operation in grid sectors that haven't been adequately covered. Clark's objection was immediate and predictable. Ma'am, this is highly irregular. We're essentially sending an unproven pilot into conditions that have defeated our most experienced aviators. We're sending a highly qualified pilot who knows those aircraft systems better than anyone else on this base into conditions she's been specifically training for, Williams corrected firmly. Sometimes leadership means recognizing capability regardless of where it comes from. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline as she realized that her years of preparation were finally going to be tested in real-world conditions. The opportunity she had been waiting for had arrived, wrapped in a life-or-death situation that would either vindicate her expertise or end her career in spectacular failure. As she headed toward the aircraft, Elena's mind was already shifting into the focused state that high-performance flying demanded. She thought about the weather patterns she had studied, the terrain characteristics she had memorized, and the aircraft systems she knew better than their designers. For the first time in her military career, her extensive preparation was going to be fully utilized. The ground crew was already prepping the F-16D when Elena arrived at the flight line. Chief Master Sergeant Angela Rodriguez, the senior maintenance supervisor, approached with the kind of respect that Elena had earned through years of professional competence. "Captain, that bird is ready for anything you can throw at it," Rodriguez said with confidence born of working alongside Elena during countless maintenance procedures. "You know her systems better than anyone." Elena nodded, accepting the helmet and flight gear that would protect her during what was about to become the most important flight of her career. In minutes, she would be airborne in conditions that had defeated her more senior colleagues, with 4 lives depending on abilities that had been dismissed and underestimated for years. What none of them knew was that Elena's flight would not only save the missing family, but would establish performance records that would rewrite the textbooks on high-altitude, adverse weather flying. The pilot they had relegated to maintenance duties was about to demonstrate capabilities that would force the entire military aviation community to reconsider everything they thought they knew about excellence in the cockpit. Elena strapped herself into the F-16D cockpit with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Every switch, gauge, and control surface was exactly where she expected it to be, not because of repetitive training, but because she had studied this particular aircraft's configuration down to the smallest detail. The pre-flight checklist that normally took other pilots 8 minutes was completed in 4, her fingers dancing across controls with the precision of a concert pianist. "Tower, this is Rescue 7 requesting immediate departure clearance," Elena transmitted, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had marked her colleagues' earlier communications. The confidence was real, born from years of preparation for exactly this type of mission. "Rescue 7, you are cleared for immediate departure. Weather advisory remains in effect for severe turbulence and limited visibility. Proceed with extreme caution." Elena acknowledged the clearance and advanced the throttles, feeling the familiar surge of power as the F-16's engine responded to her inputs. But this takeoff was different from the routine training flights that had defined her career. This time, she was flying with the full authority to demonstrate capabilities that had been suppressed for years. The aircraft lifted off into conditions that would have challenged any pilot in the squadron. Visibility was near zero with swirling snow and cloud formations that made visual navigation impossible. Elena immediately transitioned to instrument flying, but her technique incorporated nuances that weren't taught in standard training programs, subtle adjustments based on her understanding of how mountain weather affected aircraft performance. Operations. Rescue 7 is airborne and proceeding to search Grid 7 Alpha, Elena reported as she climbed through turbulent air masses that would have rattled less experienced pilots. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision that reflected both superior technical knowledge and natural flying ability that couldn't be taught. In the operations center, Colonel Williams watched Elena's aircraft symbol move across the radar screen with growing amazement. Her flight path was not only more direct than those taken by the earlier search teams, but she was maintaining course headings that seemed impossible given the reported wind conditions. How is she flying such precise tracks in this weather? Major Clark asked Dr. Walsh, his earlier skepticism beginning to give way to professional curiosity. "She's not fighting the weather," Dr. Walsh observed, studying Elena's flight data. "She's using it. Those course corrections aren't random. She's riding wind currents that the other pilots were trying to avoid." Elena's approach to mountain flying reflected years of studying meteorological patterns that most pilots considered too complex to master. Instead of viewing turbulence as an obstacle to overcome, she was using her understanding of air mass behavior to achieve flight efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. "Operations, I'm beginning search patterns in Sector 7 Alpha," Elena transmitted as she descended toward the terrain where the civilian aircraft was believed to have crashed. "Weather conditions are challenging but manageable using modified approach techniques." Her casual assessment of manageable conditions contrasted sharply with the emergency declarations that had forced her colleagues to abort their search efforts. Elena was operating in the same weather that had defeated more senior pilots, but her performance suggested she was encountering entirely different flying conditions. The search pattern Elena employed wasn't found in any manual she had developed. It through analysis of successful mountain rescues and theoretical studies of optimal search efficiency under adverse conditions. Her flight path created a systematic grid that maximized visual coverage while minimizing fuel consumption and aircraft. Stress. 20-3 minutes into her flight, Elena spotted something that previous search teams had missed. A metallic reflection barely visible through the swirling snow caught her attention as she executed a turn that would have been impossible for pilots using standard techniques. Operations. I have a possible aircraft sighting at coordinates 37.49. North, 118.22 west. Descending for visual confirmation. The descent required flying closer to mountain terrain than safety protocols normally allowed, but Elena's understanding of wind patterns enabled her to maintain safe separation margins that other pilots couldn't achieve. Her aircraft moved through the turbulent air with stability that seemed to defy the conditions reported by earlier search teams. Confirmed aircraft wreckage. Elena transmitted as she completed a low-altitude pass that provided clear visualization of the crash site. I can see movement near the aircraft. We have survivors. The confirmation of survivors sent electric energy through the operations center. The missing family was alive, but their rescue would require capabilities that exceeded normal helicopter operations. The terrain was too rugged for ground vehicles, and the weather remained too severe for standard rescue aircraft. Rescue 7, what's your assessment of rescue accessibility? Colonel Williams asked, knowing that Elena's answer would determine whether the survivors could be reached before weather conditions became completely impossible. The crash site is accessible to helicopter operations, but only with precision flying techniques. Standard approach patterns won't work due to wind, shear and terrain obstacles. I can guide a rescue helicopter to the location using real-time weather analysis. Elena's offer to coordinate helicopter operations reflected confidence in abilities that went far beyond basic flying skills. She was proposing to serve as air traffic controller, weather analyst, and rescue coordinator while maintaining her own aircraft in conditions that had defeated multiple other pilots. But as Elena continued circling the crash site, her aircraft's performance began generating data that would soon attract attention far beyond the immediate rescue operation. The F-16D's flight recorders were documenting altitude readings, G-force tolerances, and performance parameters that exceeded anything in the aircraft's operational history. Operations. I'm maintaining a station over the crash site while the rescue helicopter approaches. Be advised that I'm operating at flight levels that aren't normally accessible in these weather conditions. Elena's casual mention of flight levels that aren't normally accessible didn't immediately register with the operations team, who were focused on coordinating the helicopter rescue. But her altimeter was reading numbers that shouldn't have been possible given the reported weather conditions and aircraft limitations. The rescue helicopter, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Morgan, approached the crash site using Elena's guidance with precision that amazed even experienced rescue personnel. Morgan was considered one of the best helicopter pilots in the region, but she was relying heavily on Elena's real-time weather analysis and navigation assistance. Rescue 7, your course corrections are incredible, Morgan transmitted as she maneuvered through wind conditions that would normally prevent helicopter operations. It's like you can see the wind patterns before they develop. Elena's ability to predict wind behavior wasn't supernatural. It was the result of years studying atmospheric physics and mountain meteorology that most pilots considered beyond their scope of responsibility. Her technical knowledge was being applied in real time to save lives in ways that textbook authors had never imagined. As the helicopter extracted the 4 survivors, a family whose aircraft had been forced down by the same weather conditions that were now enabling their rescue. Elena continued maintaining her station at altitudes that were creating unprecedented flight data. Dr. Walsh, monitoring Elena's flight parameters from the operations center, began noticing readings that didn't align with established aircraft performance charts. "Colonel, I'm seeing altitude and performance data from Rescue 7 that exceeds the F-16D's documented capabilities. What do you mean?" Williams asked, still focused on the successful rescue operation. "She's flying at altitudes and in conditions that our performance manuals say are impossible for this aircraft configuration. Either our equipment is malfunctioning, or Captain Vasquez is achieving flight performance that rewrites the operational envelope." Elena's flight was indeed rewriting operational parameters, though she was too focused on the rescue mission to realize the historic nature of her performance. Her natural flying ability, combined with years of technical preparation, was pushing the aircraft beyond limits that had been considered absolute. Rescue operation is complete. All 4 survivors are secure and en route to medical facilities. Rescue 7 is returning to base. The successful rescue represented vindication of Elena's years of preparation and proof of capabilities that had been systematically ignored. But as her aircraft began its return flight to Edwards, the data being recorded would soon reveal that she had not only saved lives, but had achieved flight performance that would change military aviation history, unknown to Elena or anyone else. At Edwards Air Force Base, her return flight would establish altitude and performance records that had been considered unattainable. The pilot who had been relegated to maintenance duties was about to become the holder of flight records that would force the military aviation community to reconsider everything they thought they knew about human performance in extreme conditions. Rescue mission was complete, but Elena's transformation from overlooked maintenance officer to record-breaking aviator was just beginning. Elena's F-16D touched down at Edwards Air Force Base with the kind of precision that comes from perfect understanding of aircraft performance under extreme conditions. As she taxied toward the flight line, she had no idea that the data recorders in her aircraft contained information that would revolutionize military aviation training and rewrite the record books for high-altitude flight performance. The ground crew that met her aircraft included Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez and several technicians, whose expressions reflected barely contained excitement. Rodriguez approached Elena as she climbed down from the cockpit, her weathered face showing the kind of respect reserved for truly exceptional achievements. "Captain, I've been working on aircraft for 23 years, and I've never seen flight data like what your bird just recorded," Rodriguez said, holding a preliminary readout from the aircraft's performance monitoring systems. "You need to see these numbers." Elena accepted the datasheet with curiosity rather than anticipation, expecting to find routine performance metrics from a successful but unremarkable rescue mission. What she saw instead were altitude readings, G-force measurements, and performance parameters that seemed impossible. "These readings can't be correct," Elena said, studying numbers that indicated she had sustained flight at altitudes exceeding the F-16D's documented service ceiling by nearly 8,000 feet. "The equipment must have malfunctioned during the storm." Rodriguez shook her head with certainty born of decades working with aircraft systems. "I've checked and double-checked everything, Captain. The equipment is functioning perfectly. You flew that aircraft higher and harder than anyone thought possible." Dr. Walsh appeared at Elena's side, carrying a tablet displaying comprehensive flight analysis that had been conducted during Elena's return journey. Her expression reflected the professional excitement of someone witnessing unprecedented physiological achievement. "Captain Vasquez, your performance today exceeded human tolerance limits that we thought were absolute," Dr. Walsh explained, scrolling through data that documented Elena's responses to extreme G-forces, altitude-induced hypoxia, and sustained high-performance flying. You maintained consciousness and precision control at altitudes where most pilots would experience serious cognitive impairment. The implications of Dr. Walsh's analysis were staggering. Elena had not only saved 4 lives but had demonstrated human performance capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about physiological limitations in extreme flying conditions. Her achievement went far beyond successful mission completion. She had expanded the boundaries of what was considered humanly possible. Colonel Williams approached the group with an expression that reflected both professional amazement and personal vindication. Her decision to authorize Elena's flight had not only saved lives, but had revealed capabilities that would benefit the entire military aviation community. Captain Vasquez, Williams said formally, I've just received confirmation from Air Force Flight Test Center that your performance today has established new records in 3 separate categories: sustained high-altitude flight, adverse weather, navigation, and G-force tolerance under operational conditions. Elena stared at Colonel Williams in disbelief. The mission that had started as a desperate rescue attempt had apparently become a historic achievement that would place her name in aviation record books alongside legendary test pilots and aerospace pioneers. Ma'am, I was just trying to save those people, Elena replied, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. I had no idea I was doing anything extraordinary. That's exactly what makes it extraordinary, Dr. Walsh interjected. You achieved record-breaking performance while focused entirely on mission objectives rather than personal achievement. Your capabilities under pressure exceed anything we've documented in military aviation history. Major Clark, who had spent years dismissing Elena's potential, approached the group with visible difficulty, processing what he was witnessing. His institutional assumptions about capability and performance had been shattered by objective data that couldn't be argued with or explained away. Captain Vasquez, Clark said with obvious effort, I owe you an apology. We all do. Your performance today proves that we've been operating under fundamentally flawed assumptions about capability assessment. The admission was unprecedented in Elena's experience at Edwards. For the first time in her military career, her achievements were being recognized not despite her gender, but purely on the basis of measurable performance that spoke for itself. Of Elena's record-breaking flight spread through Edwards Air Force Base within hours, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate rescue mission. Pilots who had dismissed her as unqualified began requesting meetings to understand her techniques. Flight instructors asked for detailed debriefings about her approach to extreme weather flying. The Air Force times called within 24 hours, followed by Aviation Week, Flying Magazine, and eventually major news networks whose aviation correspondents recognized the historic significance of Elena's achievement. The pilot who had been relegated to maintenance duties had become one of the most sought-after interview subjects in military aviation. Morrison, Foster, and Jenkins, the pilots whose struggles with weather conditions had necessitated Elena's rescue mission, approached her individually over the following days. Each conversation followed a similar pattern of professional embarrassment, mixed with grudging respect for abilities they had failed to recognize. I need to understand how you did it, Morrison admitted during a private conversation in the squadron. Ready room. I've been flying for 8 years, and I couldn't handle conditions that you navigated like they were routine training exercises. Elena's response reflected the grace under pressure that had characterized her entire career. You were using techniques designed for standard conditions. I spent years studying how to modify those techniques for extreme environments. The difference wasn't natural ability, it was preparation. Her explanation was both generous and accurate. While Elena possessed exceptional natural flying ability, her record-breaking performance had resulted primarily from years of dedicated study and preparation that had been dismissed by colleagues as excessive or unnecessary. The Pentagon's response to Elena's achievement was swift and comprehensive. Within a week, she received orders to report to the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards, the same program that had been considered beyond her reach just days earlier. The assignment came with a promotion to major and assignment to develop new training protocols based on her extreme weather flying techniques. The Air Force needs pilots who can operate beyond conventional limitations, Colonel Williams explained. During Elena's promotion ceremony, "Your performance proves that we've been underutilizing talent based on outdated assumptions about capability and potential." The ceremony was attended by pilots from multiple squadrons, many of whom had never taken Elena seriously as an aviator. Their presence reflected growing recognition that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources and that institutional biases could prevent organizations from utilizing their most capable personnel. Elena's flight records were formally certified by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, placing her achievements in the same category as Chuck Yeager's breaking of the sound barrier and other legendary aviation milestones. Her name would appear in aviation textbooks alongside the most celebrated pilots in history. The irony wasn't lost on Elena that her greatest professional achievement had resulted from circumstances that forced her colleagues to ignore their preconceptions about her capabilities. The rescue mission had created conditions where performance mattered more than politics, allowing her abilities to be demonstrated without institutional interference. 6 months later, Elena was invited to address the graduating class at the Air Force Academy, speaking to future pilots about the importance of preparation, perseverance, and the danger of allowing assumptions to limit potential. Her message resonated with cadets who faced their own challenges in pursuing aviation careers despite institutional obstacles. "Excellence isn't about proving others wrong," Elena told the graduates. "It's about preparing yourself so thoroughly that when an opportunity appears, you're ready to perform regardless of who believes in your capabilities." The Academy's commandant, General Patricia Stevens, introduced Elena as the pilot who demonstrated that the only limitations on human performance are the ones we accept without question. Her flight records had become teaching tools used to illustrate the importance of continuous learning and the danger of complacency in capability assessment. Elena's story spread beyond military aviation into corporate leadership training, where it was used to illustrate the costs of overlooking talent based on superficial assessments. Business schools taught case studies about the Vasquez effect, the phenomena of exceptional performers being overlooked due to institutional biases. The civilian family that Elena had rescued established a scholarship fund in her honor, providing aviation training opportunities for young women pursuing careers in military flying. Their gratitude reflected not only appreciation for their lives being saved, but recognition that Elena's achievement had opened doors for future generations of female aviators. Years later, when aviation historians analyzed the factors that led to Elena's record-breaking performance, they consistently identified the same elements: exceptional preparation, institutional obstacles that demanded superior performance for recognition, and the courage to volunteer for missions that others deemed too dangerous. Elena Vasquez had entered that rescue mission as an overlooked maintenance officer and emerged as a record-holding test pilot whose achievements would influence military aviation training for decades. Her transformation proved that excellence often exists in unexpected places, waiting for circumstances that allow it to be fully demonstrated and properly recognized. 3 years after that transformative rescue mission, Major Elena Vasquez stood in the briefing room at the Air Force Test Pilot School, but this time she occupied the instructor's podium rather than a back row seat. The 24 pilots assembled before her represented the most elite aviators in the Air Force, each selected through rigorous competition that had once seemed beyond Elena's reach. Today we're going to discuss extreme altitude performance and why everything you think you know about physiological limitations is probably wrong, Elena began, her voice carrying the authority that came from holding records that had redefined the possible. The students included both male and female pilots, but the dynamics in the room were fundamentally different from Elena's early experiences at Edwards. Her achievements had created space for conversations about capability that were based on demonstrated performance rather than inherited assumptions about gender and flying ability. Captain Jennifer Walsh, Dr. Caroline Walsh's daughter who had followed her mother into military service, raised her hand with a question that reflected the generational changes Elena's breakthrough had helped create. Major Vasquez, how do we identify when institutional limitations are preventing us from reaching our actual capabilities? The question struck at the heart of Elena's experience and the broader implications of her story. Her answer would influence how future test pilots approach the boundaries between accepted limitations and actual human potential. The key is distinguishing between physical limitations and psychological barriers disguised as institutional wisdom, Elena replied, drawing on years of reflection about her own journey. Most of the time, when someone tells you something is impossible, they're really saying it's never been done before, or it challenges existing assumptions about how things should work. Elena's teaching methodology incorporated lessons learned from her record-breaking flight, but also from the institutional resistance she had overcome to reach her current position. Her students were learning not just advanced flying techniques, but how to navigate organizational structures that might not immediately recognize exceptional capability. The test pilot school had been transformed by Elena's achievements in ways that extended far beyond curriculum updates. Her flight data had been incorporated into new training protocols that pushed all pilots toward performance levels previously considered unattainable. The Vasquez standards had become benchmarks for extreme weather flying and high-altitude operations. During advanced training exercises, Elena's students regularly achieved performance levels that would have been considered impossible before her historic flight. The psychological barrier of impossible had been removed, allowing human potential to expand in directions that administrators were still struggling to understand. Colonel Patricia Williams, now promoted to Brigadier General and commander of the Air Force Flight Test Center, often observed Elena's classes with satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. Williams had taken a career-defining risk in authorizing Elena's rescue mission, and the results had validated leadership approaches that prioritized capability over conventional wisdom. What Major Vasquez accomplished goes beyond individual achievement, Williams explained to a congressional committee examining military personnel development. She proved that institutional biases can prevent organizations from utilizing their most capable people, and that breakthrough performance often comes from unexpected sources. Elena's influence extended into commercial aviation, where her techniques for extreme weather flying had been adapted for civilian aircraft operations. Airlines reported significant improvements in on-time performance and safety margins after implementing training protocols based on Elena's approach to atmospheric navigation. The international aviation community had embraced Elena's methods with enthusiasm that bordered on reverence. The Royal Air Force invited her to train their test pilots, while the French military incorporated her high-altitude techniques into their elite pilot programs. Elena had become a global ambassador for advanced flying techniques that were reshaping how military and civilian aviation approached human performance limits. But perhaps the most significant impact of Elena's achievement was its effect on young women considering military aviation careers. Applications to Air Force pilot training programs had increased dramatically, with many candidates specifically citing Elena's example as inspiration for pursuing careers they had previously considered unattainable. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, one of Elena's current students and a rising star in the test pilot program, represented the new generation of female aviators who entered military service with different expectations about what was possible. Chun's performance in training regularly exceeded established benchmarks, continuing the upward trajectory of capability that Elena had initiated. Major Vasquez showed us that excellence isn't about fitting into existing categories, Chun explained. During a documentary about women military aviation, it's about performing so well that new categories have to be created to measure what you've accomplished. Elena's personal life had also been transformed by her professional breakthrough. She had married Dr. Michael Santos, a civilian aerospace engineer who had been recruited to study the technical aspects of her record-breaking flight. Their relationship was built on mutual respect for professional achievement and shared fascination with pushing the boundaries of human performance. Santos had been instrumental in developing new aircraft modifications based on Elena's flight data, creating enhanced systems that allowed other pilots to approach her performance levels more safely. His engineering expertise, combined with Elena's practical flying experience, had produced innovations that were advancing the entire field of high-performance aviation. The couple's work together had resulted in several patents for aircraft control systems and pilot training devices that were being implemented across military and civilian aviation. Elena's achievement had not only opened doors for her personally, but had created economic and technological opportunities that benefited the broader aviation industry. Elena's story had been documented in multiple books, with the most comprehensive account becoming required reading at military academies worldwide. Breaking Barriers, the Elena Vasquez story, had spent months on bestseller lists and had been translated into 17 languages, spreading her influence far beyond English-speaking aviation communities. The book's success had led to speaking engagements at corporate leadership conferences, where Elena's experience was used to illustrate the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its source. Fortune 500 companies had implemented Vasquez protocols designed to identify and develop overlooked high performers within their organizations. Elena's annual return to Edwards Air Force Base for the anniversary of her rescue mission had become a significant event attended by aviation leaders from around the world. The ceremony honored not just her individual achievement, but the broader principle that exceptional performance could emerge from unexpected places when given appropriate opportunities. During her most recent anniversary speech, Elena reflected on the journey from overlooked maintenance officer to internationally recognized aviation pioneer. The most important lesson isn't about flying techniques or breaking records, she told the assembled crowd. It's about preparing yourself so thoroughly that when opportunity appears, you're ready to perform regardless of who believes in your capabilities. The crash site where Elena had found the missing family had been marked with a monument honoring her achievement, but also recognizing the 4 people whose rescue had made her historic flight possible. The memorial served as a reminder that extraordinary individual performance often emerged from situations requiring service to others rather than personal advancement. Elena's flight records still stood as testaments to human potential that challenged conventional understanding of physiological limitations. But her more lasting contribution was the institutional change she had sparked, the recognition that talent could exist in forms that weren't immediately obvious to traditional evaluation methods. The Air Force had established the Elena Vasquez Center for Advanced Flight Performance, where pilots from around the world came to train in extreme flying conditions using techniques she had pioneered. The center's research continued pushing the boundaries of human performance in ways that honored Elena's example of preparation meeting opportunity. That 10 years after that stormy rescue mission, Elena's influence on military aviation was so complete that many young pilots couldn't imagine a time when female aviators faced the systematic exclusion she had overcome. Her achievement had become part of aviation history, but more importantly, it had changed the present and future for countless others who would benefit from doors She had opened through exceptional performance under pressure. Elena Vasquez had entered that rescue mission as an overlooked pilot seeking to save lives and emerged as a legend, whose achievements would influence aviation training and human performance understanding for generations. Her story proved that sometimes the most extraordinary capabilities exist in people who are waiting for circumstances that allow their true potential to be recognized and properly utilized. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.